reflecting the 29th of November, that's a Wednesday, the very last Wednesday of November, we have got the moment of all moments for this year. We're inviting every leader, every potential leader, to come early to the South site in Pietermaritzburg. That's 6:30, 4/7, for a massive celebration and an expectation we have of hearing God for our next 50 years. We've got a guest speaker down from Pretoria, Rory Dyer, a great friend of the church, phenomenal preacher. You don't want to miss it. So if you're a leader, if you're a potential leader, no matter where you live, we encourage you to try and get there. And let's end this year waiting on God, hearing, seeing what He has to say. Look forward to seeing you there.
One, two. Good morning, everybody. It's really good to be here, and I'm just very grateful. I was actually standing in front here and just quite moved at hearing you guys sing. I don't know if you don't know me, I'm the guy from Church News. And someone said, you shorter and fatter in real life when I came in. So, thank you, Adrian. 3 years ago, Caroline and myself went to go start a site in Cape Town. And I just want to mention one thing about the site before we get on the preach. Is that every single Tuesday, I get a notification on my phone from YouTube. If you're not a subscriber to us, now's the chance. That says the South is praying, prayer meeting. And we feel very carried by your prayers. And I think what's happened down there is less about the people involved and who it is, and more about what happens here on a Tuesday night. And so keep going, keep praying. You have no idea the investment that keeps. We feel very held up by your prayers. So it's really great to be here. We're going to get straight into it. John chapter 11. So I wonder if you can open up your Bibles. And this is kind of almost the crescendo chapter of John. This is the fulcrum point on which the whole book changes after this particular point. John has been building up who Jesus is, revealing different sides of who He is and what He's like. And he's used the I am statements that Jesus uses to describe what Jesus is like, where Jesus says, I'm the bread of life, I'm the light of the world, I'm the door, I'm the good shepherd. And Jesus is just showing different facets of who Jesus is through what He said and the miracles, but He's building up to this point. John chapter 11 is pretty much halfway through the book of John, and then everything changes from this point. And it is probably one of the most crucial chapters that separates Jesus Christ from any other deity, God, guru, rabbi, or whoever it is. This chapter is a chapter where His disciples begin to realize who they're dealing with. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read it together. I'm going to read a big chunk of scripture, and then we're going to go through it. John chapter 11. It's a long chapter. I'm not going to go through all of it, but we're going to read a big portion of it. John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When He heard this, Jesus said, the sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when He heard that Lazarus was sick, He stayed where he was 2 more days. And then He said to His disciples, let us go back to Judea. Verse 17. On His arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet Him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again at the resurrection of the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Jesus once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. This is one of the most magnificent chapters in the book of John. And if you're new to Christianity here, if this is the first time you've come to church, I want to say welcome. You've chosen a great Sunday. And I know coming to church is like going to gym for the first time. You just want to pretend you know how the equipment works. And I want to say that today you are going to look through the lens of this chapter and see the one who raises the dead back to life. So I've got 3 points when I want to hinge the next few minutes with us. I want to look at, we have a king who conquered death, we have a king who loves us, and we have a king who weeps with us. One of the things that happened when we moved down to Cape Town, we went as a couple, Caroline and myself, and when you're church planting, you look for any person you can get to join the church. We really wanted more people, so we had a child, and her name's Isla, and she's 1 year old, and she's part of the One Life Church congregation there. And I remember she's come back to KZN now. We spent some time with family as a little 1 year old, and she loves insects at the moment, ladybugs, and she loves like little ants. She follows them around, and in Cape Town, unfortunately, the DA hasn't figured out how to make big ants. So KZN, you guys have big ants, right? And so we have big ants running around that she loves to follow around. And so, she's following all these ants around here in KZN by the poolside. And she loves the activity and the life there. And she's running around pointing the whole time. She can't speak yet. But the one ant she saw had landed up in the pool and unfortunately drowned. And so I kind of scooped it out because she was pointing at it as though, it was a swimmer ant, and put it on the ground. And she kind of kept looking at it and trying to figure out why it wasn't moving around like the other ants. And so we went into a bit of a philosophical conversation with a toddler on death and what it means for something to die. And I remember saying, no, it's dead. It's not. That's the state it is in now. And she kept running around following the other answers. She kept coming back to this one as though, why is it not the same as those ones? And in her little 1 year old toddler mind, you can see her computing, trying to, in her heart and mind, figure out what is up with this ant. Like she's never experienced anything that's been dead before. And I thought to myself, you might say, well, that's a toddler. And we got used to death right now, but I would say that there's no time that we get used to death at any stage. It feels very foreign. It feels very abstract. It feels very much like there's a contrast here. And I think no matter what age you are, when death arrives, and even though one in one people die here on this earth, including Lazarus, he died again, it still feels very foreign. We don't like to talk about death. We've sanitized death to such a point that we actually almost put it away somewhere when it does occur. We use things like, morticians and hospitals and hospices just to get away. We don't even say someone's dead because it sounds rude. We say someone's passed on or they're late, right? We use all these things to kind of put it away because it still feels like something is not quite right. Something has happened. It feels foreign. No matter how much we are acquainted with it, whether you are 85 or 8 months or 1 year old, it feels like something foreign has occurred. Like a glitch in the system. Like a bug in a computer that's not meant to be there. It feels like an intrusion. It feels like a full stop in a sentence where there shouldn't be a full stop. And I think people have approached death in very different ways. The Stoics, the Greek philosophers that much of our Western culture is based on, would say, just be indifferent to it. We all know it's going to occur, so just, stiff up a lip, you can get through it. Whereas some people are so afraid of death that they try everything to avoid it because there's such fear that it's going to happen. And so they put it off and they find different things to kind of prolong their life as much as possible, medicine and cosmetics. But we all can see that wrinkle, right? Here's the thing, is how did Jesus approach death? What is the attitude that Jesus had when he saw death? And it's quite interesting. I read from the NIV, but I want to read it in the NLT because I think it brings something else to life. In verse 33, if you have your Bibles open, in verse 33, when Jesus comes and he sees his friend has died, it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, saw the other people wailing with her, in the NLT, you'll read, doesn't say deeply moved like the NIV, it says deeply angry. Verse 38 says the same thing. Jesus was still angry. And the word there is a mixture of sorrow and anger welling up from within. It's that Jesus is almost raging against death itself. He's not angry at Mary. He's not angry at Martha. He's not angry at the weeping. He's angry at this foreign thing called death. And I was praying over this and I was like, Lord, what does that feel like? I'm reading this text. I don't want it just to be intellectual. I want to feel this. And I unfortunately, God didn't show me anything at that point, but somehow I was online on a social media platform. Obviously, there are a lot of wars taking place right now. I'm not going to give, the scenario. I just want you to picture a dad and a girl. A little girl, like 2 years old. And this father holding his daughter who's dead and trying to lift the eyelids so he can see her eyes one last time before he gives her over to the medics who put a cloth over her. And at that moment, I felt angry. I felt angry at this foreign concept called death. Because here's the truth. You and I, born in the image of God in the Garden of Eden, were never meant to experience death. We were never meant to experience death. C.S. Lewis, the greatest apologist of the 20th century, said this: human death, according to the Christians, is a result of human sin. Man, as originally created, was immune from it. Death is the triumph of Satan, the punishment of the fall, and the last enemy. We were never meant to be indifferent to sin like the Stoics. We were never meant to be fearful like some people in this world. We were meant to be angry and raging against sin because it wasn't God's original intent. It still feels foreign, no matter if you're 1 year old or if you're 85, no matter if it's a tragic death or took its time, we know that death is not meant to be part of this world. God never designed it that way. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says that God has set eternity in the human heart. I always laugh when people say, you should live your life as if it's your last day. Because you can do that for maybe one day, but you will not do that for a week. You cannot. Because everything in your human heart rages against death. This cannot come to an end. This cannot be the full stop. We see this full stop in life and we're like, this sentence should not have stopped at this point. Because there's something how we've been made in the image of God that rages against death. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's raging. He sees the tomb. He sees the weeping. And he rages inside. What we have to understand is that although you and I may rage, we do not have the power. But the difference with Jesus is that he does have the power. He's not powerless in the face of death. Even though I was watching this father with his little girl, I thought, God, you did not design the world this way. 3 of the most powerful words ever recorded in history were the 3 words, Lazarus, come out. Death is the most powerful force we know, but these had more power. These could raise the dead. These could take, the King James, if you're reading it, says, he stinketh, right after 4 days. The odor, the decay, and resurrect a perfect person. We serve a God who transforms our full stops into commas. Where it should have been a full stop is now just simply a veil, and then we have life with him forever. I remember watching the Queen Elizabeth's funeral. I had this illustration just for Emma Deirdrick's in the front row, right? And Queen Elizabeth's funeral was quite remarkable because for a lot of that nation, it was a full stop. It was the end of an era. And I've had the fortunate, privilege of visiting Westminster Abbey where it took place. And I mean, Westminster Abbey is huge. I mean, you look up at it. And I was watching this funeral thinking I've been there, where they're walking in right now. And here's this coffin with a very dead monarch in it. And there was this moment as they reached the door that everyone paused and there was silence for about 30 seconds. Now, if you didn't know, the Queen knew she was going to die. And she arranged her entire funeral, including the hymns that were going to be sung. And after the silence, a choir got up and sang these words, I am the resurrection and the life. For that nation, it was a full stop. For her family members, it was a full stop. But for the Queen, it was simply a comma to say that she knew a king, the true king and savior who has conquered death. See, we have to ask ourselves 3 questions in light of this chapter. Firstly, do you see Christ as powerless or powerful? When Paul writes to his letter to the church in Ephesus, he says this one prayer that he's been praying from prison for the people in the church. And just pretend he's praying for it right now for you guys from this letter, for the South Side. And just thinking about you guys as the South Side. He says this, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms, far above all rule, authority, power, and dominion, and every name that is invoked, not only in the present age, but also in the one to come. Do you see this king as powerful? Do you see him as the one who conquers the most powerful force that we know? Second thing is, do you see a death-conquering Christ? I love I love what he says to Mary and Martha in verse 26. He says, do you believe this? Do you believe this? And the thing is, what Mary and Martha were expecting, they were expecting a healer in Bethany. That's where they were from. They were expecting a rabbi. They were expecting a great teacher. But Jesus was saying, do you believe that something more is here? Something more than simply a teacher or a healer. But do you know that right there in the little town of Bethany, the author of life is there? The one who conquered the king is there. The resurrection and the life is there. And on the south side, do you know who is here right now? Is he simply a great wisdom teacher, a great philosopher, or is he the one that's conquered the grave? This is what 1 Corinthians 26 says. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Lastly, how are we meant to face death? Because it does happen. Lazarus died. There is two emotions that we're meant to fear. The one is we're meant to feel. The one is rage. We should experience rage like Jesus did. I think sometimes I understand the sentiment that Christians say, don't worry, they're in heaven now. I get it. Like, that's true. That's very true. But we should still rage against death. We should still be angry when death is. But here's the one thing we should not feel is fear. We do not need to fear death. We should rage, but not be fearful. So the two emotions we should feel. Hebrews 2 verse 14 to 15 says, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. One Life Church Southside, you do not have to fear death. Rage against it. Realize that this wasn't part of God's plan. Realize that this is something foreign, but do not fear it. There's this poem by a guy called George Herbert. He lived in about the 1700s, and he wrote this poem of a conversation between a Christian and death. And this is what death says to the Christian: these arms shall crush thee. And then the Christian's reply is, spare not, do thy worst. I shall be one day better than before. It's like, come at me, death. I do not fear you, because one day I know I'll be resurrected with my Savior. Revelations 21, this is the great, when all time is wrapped up, this is the great paradise that's in front of us. Revelations 21, 3, 4, when God resets everything so that there are no more glitches, no more foreign objects that weren't part of his plan. It says this in Revelations 21, verse 3 to 4, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He'll wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, nor mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things, has passed away. We have a king who has conquered death, but we also have a king in the middle where we do experience death who loves us. I want you to notice this really strange verse. Imagine if this was a friend that you had. John verse 11, verse 5, clearly explains that Jesus loves them and he's going to express their love for them. John 11, verse 5, when Jesus is away, quite far away, before he hears that Lazarus has died, he says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. I'm like, that's a bad friend. I'm like, if you hear that your friend's in trouble, you drop everything and you go to them. But it says, because Jesus loved them, he waited 2 more days. Because Jesus loved them, he waited 2 more days. It feels like the opposite of love. Notice in verse 23, 24, all right, this is what he says to them as well. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. This is what Jesus says to her, right? Martha's saying, I know that Lazarus will rise again one day on the other side when time is wrapped up one day and death is defeated. Sure. But Jesus actually shifts her timeline forward and he raises Lazarus right there. So for some people, he makes them wait, but for others, he shifts the timeline forward. Why does he do that? Why does he do that? Sometimes we can feel like our timeline that we expect God to move, it feels like it shifts around. You can say, well, Tristan, like Lazarus was raised from the dead, but the person I love wasn't raised from the dead. This feels like, I see the timeline, but it just doesn't feel right. It feels like God doesn't appreciate the timeline that I'm trying to give him. The truth is, Jesus shifts our faith from a faith for something to a faith in someone. Jesus shifts the timelines and the expectations so that we less have faith for something and more have the substance of our faith in someone. Let me explain what I mean by that. Obviously, there are a lot of world events going on, and so some people have been really excited about some end times things, as they do. And so what they've done is they've started pinning dates on when they think Jesus will definitely return on this date. And so people have sold things and it's been pretty hectic. And then when Jesus doesn't come, disappointed. Because their faith was for something, not in someone. And you can love Jesus in a way, desire Jesus when he meets your expectations and your timelines. But the problem is, that doesn't love him for who he is, it just loves him for something. And Jesus is doing the most loving thing for these two ladies by shifting their faith, not for something, but in someone. Jesus doesn't say, I'm going to be there at the resurrection. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. The central point of this chapter is clinging to Jesus, not for what he can give you, but for who he is as Lord and King. That's the most loving thing that Jesus does for these two ladies at this point. And he says, you know what, I might not meet your expectations, but I'll always exceed them either in this life or the next. Don't cling to me for what I could give you. Cling to me for who I am. See, if Jesus had not waited, they would know Jesus as the healer, but not as the resurrection and the life. Here's the truth. Waiting on God is not necessarily what you get at the end of the wait, but rather what you become in the wait. And it's very true. Some people have said that the only thing harder than waiting on God is wishing you had. I think a lot of times we don't understand what God is doing and we don't understand the timeline. We want him to come on our timeline, but the truth is he doesn't come on our timeline because that'd just be faith for something, not faith in someone. And he shifts all those things so that we cling to him as not only healer, not only teacher, but as the resurrection and the life. And what we do know is that one day death will be defeated. And we're like, God, we cried. We're like, is it going to happen now? No, but we still cling to him. This is the last point. We have a king who weeps with us. See, there's a meta-narrative, there's a storyline of the Bible that we need to understand. We shouldn't put a timeline on it, but there is a storyline. Storyline is in Genesis 1 and 2, no death, perfection. Genesis 3, the fall. There we are now in the messy middle, what Jesus calls this age. And then at the end, once again, Jesus will reset everything to be how it was, but we live in the messy middle. You know what I appreciate most about Jesus in this chapter? Is he doesn't come waltzing into Bethany and says, just chill, guys. Just relax. Lazarus is, going to come up. Wipe away those tears. Just have a bit of joy. He doesn't do that. He knows that Lazarus is going to rise again. He says it in the beginning of the chapter. But this is what he does. Verse 35, he enters into their grieving. He enters into their sadness. And he enters into your messy middle where you are right now. You have a high priest who conquered the grave, who loves you, but who also weeps with you, who rages with you, who is angry at sin and death just as much as you are. And in that moment, you cling to him not only because he is the author of life and he raises dead people back to life, but you also cling to him in the moment, in the messy middle. This chapter is one of the most crucial chapters in the whole Bible, because it reveals that these girls had an expectation of who they thought Jesus was, as a healer, as a rabbi. But Jesus came to show them that he's actually the very author of life. And if you're a visitor here, I love to pray with you so that you'd meet the author of life, that you come to him. And what he does is he actually brings life to our spirit. The Bible says that our spirit's actually dead, that we need someone to breathe life into it. And he's the only one that can do that. And so how I'd love to do this is I wonder if we could all please stand and if the band could come on up. And I'd love to pray with you, if you wouldn't mind just closing your eyes. But just before you do, just like to end with this quote from St. Augustine, who said, "Therefore he has taken death and attached death to the cross, and from death itself mortal men are freed." St. Augustine was an African theologian who lived in about the 3rd century. And the one thing he knew about Jesus is that Jesus has taken death upon himself so that we, although we experience death on this earth, we will live forever afterwards. Jesus walked to the cross. Death looked him at the face and said, "I will crush thee." And Jesus said, "Do thy worst." Because he knew he was taking the death of every single person so that we might live forever in union with God. I want to pray for 2 groups of people. Firstly, that one who would meet the author of life and realize what Jesus has done for you. But secondly, maybe you're in that messy middle and it feels like God is far off, that you would feel his presence, that he weeps and rages with you. And so if that's you, we're going to close our eyes in a moment. We're actually going to break bread. But while we break your bread, if you need prayer, just to come forward. And then secondly, if you've never met the author of life here, if you've never met the one who raises dead people back to life, and you don't know this Jesus, I'd love to pray with you. Is anyone like that? If you could just raise your hand. Anyone like that? Just raise your hand high so I can see, just so that we know who to send to pray with you. Anyone like that? That's beautiful. It's beautiful. We all know the author of life. And if you were maybe too afraid to put up your hand, that's fine. Just come to the front afterwards with people who need prayer. But we're going to break bread together. And the bread is, when we break bread together and share communion with one another, it's reflecting on the cross of Jesus Christ and what he's done for us. So Anton will explain how that's done in a moment. But as we take the grape juice and that bit of cracker bread, that you would remind yourself of the author of life, who died so that we could have life and life to the full, who rages against death and who will one day put death to death. And we would live for eternity with him. So let's do that. Anton, I wonder if you wouldn't mind coming. Oh, it's going to be Mark. Sorry, you guys look similar in the dark.
Tristan, that was an amazing word. Can we just appreciate that just for a moment? Let's just encourage him. I'm going to ask you now, if you wouldn't mind just making your way. There are tables in the stands and down the front, and this band will play quietly while you just make your way and get the cup and the bread. And we're going to take communion together. And as Tristan said, communion is for those that believe, that have put their faith in Jesus Christ. If you're an unbeliever,
Oh, come down to be with you now in a world so loud. Your sanctuary found in the dark. Feel your heart beat for something more. Subtle spark, a distant star is born. I believe we're reflecting light, like the sea on a winter night. Two satellites. Words whispered, holding out our hand. You breathe life into barren lands. Oh, from where I stand, I believe we're reflecting light, like the sea on a winter night. Oh, honey, we're reflecting